He was forged in the fire of 100 missions, a guardian sculpted by conflict, yet he felt dismissed by the very world he had sworn to protect. Navy SEAL Silas Kane sought peace in the misty solitude of the Pacific Northwest, a sanctuary for a soul weary of war. Beside him, his only constant, the one being who had never failed him, Bear, a Belgian Malinois whose loyalty was as unshakable as the mountains that now surrounded them. But in this quiet refuge, while searching for a stillness he had long forgotten, Silas and his canine partner would unearth a secret so deadly it threatened to shatter the very foundations of their nation. They found more than a secret. They found a woman, a storm, and a war that followed them home. The world thinks these operators are just weapons, but what happens when the weapon decides to become a shield? What happens when a man who has only known the battlefield finds his final, most important mission in his own backyard? Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, because this story of loyalty and sacrifice is for every patriot who believes one good man and his dog can still make a stand. God bless you and your families. The cabin was a small, defiant box of warmth against the encroaching cold. Silas Kane watched the Cascade Mountains disappear behind a curtain of steel-gray cloud, the scent of pine and imminent rain sharp in the air. He ran a hand over the smooth, worn stock of the rifle resting across his lap, its cold familiarity a strange comfort. Leave. The word itself felt foreign, a loose-fitting garment he couldn't get comfortable in. In the field, there was clarity, objective, target, exfil. Here in the deafening silence between missions, the world was a cage of fog, his own thoughts the most dangerous enemy. He was a weapon without a target, a protector without a charge. Bear whined softly from his position by the hearth, the firelight dancing in his intelligent, dark eyes. He nudged Silas's hand with his wet nose, a low rumble in his chest. Silas looked down at the dog, the chiseled lines of his face softening for a fraction of a second. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice a low gravel. "Just the weather." But it wasn't just the weather. Bear's ears were a finely tuned instrument, and they were twitching, aimed at the dense woods beyond the clearing. Silas felt it too, a subtle shift in the rhythm of the forest. The quiet had become too quiet. The normal chatter of birds and squirrels had ceased, replaced by a tense, waiting stillness. He set the rifle aside, his movements economical and precise, the result of years of training that had stripped away every wasted motion. He was a study in controlled potential, every muscle coiled and ready. He didn't need a uniform to be an operator. It was etched into his posture, his gaze, the very way he occupied space. The first drops of rain hit the tin roof, a slow, deliberate tapping that quickly escalated into a frantic drumming. The wind began to howl, a mournful sound that clawed at the corners of the cabin. Silas moved to the window, peering into the swirling gloom. The world outside was a churning chaos of wind and water. He was supposed to be safe here. This was his sanctuary, the one place he could lower his guard. But the instincts that had kept him alive in the dust-choked streets of Kandahar and the humid jungles of forgotten countries were screaming now. He was being watched or hunted. Bear was on his feet now, a low, menacing growl vibrating through the floorboards. The dog's hackles were raised, his body a rigid line of focused aggression pointed directly at the front door. Silas didn't question it. He never questioned Bear. He moved to the heavy oak door, retrieving the Sig Sauer from the holster on his hip. The click of the safety being disengaged was unnaturally loud in the small room. He looked at Bear. "Watch my back," he commanded softly. The dog didn't move, his gaze locked, a silent promise of violence to whatever lay on the other side. The storm was a living thing, a furious beast tearing at the wilderness. Rain fell in blinding sheets, and the wind shrieked like something wounded. Bear, however, was insistent. He pawed at the door, his whining escalating to a sharp, commanding bark that cut through the gale. Silas knew that bark. It wasn't aggression. It was an alert, a find. He pulled on a heavy rain slicker, his mind a whirlwind of tactical assessments. Who would be out here? In this? A lost hiker? A trap? His hand never left the grip of his pistol as he cracked the door open. The wind ripped it from his grasp, slamming it against the interior wall. A torrent of rain and leaves flooded the entrance. Bear bolted out into the maelstrom without hesitation, a dark shape swallowed instantly by the chaos. "Bear, heel!" Silas roared, but his voice was shredded by the wind. Cursing, he followed, the cold water a physical shock. He was a weapon, and his weapon was now off-leash. He moved with a terrifying fluid grace, his feet finding purchase on the slick, muddy ground as if by memory. He followed the sound of Bear's frantic barking, pushing through whipping branches that tore at his face and clothes. The forest was a disorienting nightmare of noise and motion. Then he saw him. Bear was 50 yards from the cabin at the edge of a steep, eroded ravine. He was barking, not at a threat, but down into the darkness. He would bark, then whine, looking back at Silas with an unnerving desperation. Silas holstered his weapon and slid down the muddy embankment, the loose soil giving way beneath his boots. And then he saw her, a woman, half submerged in the rushing, debris-choked water at the bottom of the ravine. Her face was pale, almost translucent in the gloom, marred by a dark gash on her forehead. Her clothes were torn, and one arm was bent at an unnatural angle. She was unconscious, or worse. Silas's focus narrowed to a pinpoint. The world of leave, of peace, of internal conflict, evaporated. It was replaced by the ice-cold focus of the operator. Triage, assess, act. He sloshed through the freezing water, reaching her in 3 long strides. He checked for a pulse. It was there, thready and weak, but there. Hypothermia was setting in. He needed to get her out. Now. With a grunt, he hooked his arms under her, lifting her from the water. She was lighter than he expected, fragile. As he shifted his grip, a small, hard object fell from the pocket of her ruined jacket, landing with a soft thud in the mud. He ignored it. The mission was the woman. He began the arduous climb back up the ravine, his muscles straining under the dead weight of her body and the force of the storm. Bear scrambled beside him, nuding her limp hand, whining, as if trying to will her back to consciousness. Just as they reached the top, her eyes fluttered open. They were wide, with a terror that had nothing to do with the storm. Her lips, blue with cold, formed a single, choked word. Run. Then her eyes rolled back, and she was gone again. But the word hung in the air, a chilling certainty that settled deep in Silas's gut. This was no lost hiker. This was a target, and the hunters were close. He swept her into his arms and sprinted back toward the cabin, the single word echoing with every pounding footstep. Run! The cabin, once a sanctuary, now felt like a kill box. Silas laid the woman gently on the thick bearskin rug in front of the fire, his movements swift and efficient. He stripped away her soaked, torn clothing with a clinical detachment. his mind cataloguing injuries. Broken ulnar, left arm, laceration on the forehead, deep but not arterial, severe hypothermia, multiple contusions, defensive wounds on her hands and forearms. She had fought hard. He wrapped her in heavy wool blankets, elevating her feet. He returned to the ravine in his mind. The object she dropped. It could be a clue. It could be the reason for all of this, but he couldn't go back for it. Not yet. The immediate priority was keeping her alive. Bear lay down next to her, a furry living furnace, licking her cold hand. "Good boy," Silas said, his voice low and tight. He trusted the dog's instincts completely. Bear wasn't just a pet. He was a partner, a force multiplier. His senses were an extension of Silas's own. While the woman stabilized, Silas moved through the cabin, his operator mind taking over completely. He checked every window, every door. He retrieved his primary rifle, a customized AR-15, and laid out 3 extra magazines on the heavy oak table. He placed his pistol within easy reach. He was preparing a battlefield. The storm provided auditory cover, but it also masked the enemy's approach. He dimmed the oil lamps until the room was cast in deep, dancing shadows. He was more comfortable in the dark. It was an old friend. An hour passed. The woman's breathing became deeper, more regular. The color was slowly returning to her cheeks. Silas knelt beside her, checking her pulse again. Stronger. She stirred, her brow furrowing. "The drive," she whispered, her voice raspy. "The silver drive." Silas's eyes flickered to the door. The object. It had to be. He looked back at her. Her eyes were open now, lucid and intelligent, but filled with a desperate urgency. "They can't get it. The Sanctuary Project. It's not what they think." Before he could ask, Bear shot to his feet, the growl in his chest no longer a warning, but a declaration of war. A split second later, Silas heard it, the subtle crunch of tires on the gravel of his long, winding driveway. Not a lost hiker, not a park ranger. The sound was heavy, tactical, a utility vehicle. Maybe 2. They were here. Silas grabbed the rifle. He didn't return fire. He was escaping. He was a weapon without a target. No, that wasn't right anymore. He looked at the woman, her face a pale oval in the firelight. He had a target now. It was anyone who tried to harm her. He was a guardian. He moved to the main window, staying deep in the shadows, and peered through a small gap in the curtains. 2 blacked-out SUVs, their headlights off, sat at the edge of the clearing. Doors opened, and 4 figures emerged. They moved with the familiar, predatory efficiency of trained professionals. Body armor, suppressed rifles, earpieces, mercenaries. One of them raised a hand, directing the others into a flanking formation. They were professionals, but so was he. He was better. He had the home field advantage, and he had Bear. He backed away from the window, his mind a cold, clear stream of tactical options. He could fortify, turn the cabin into a fortress, but that would make it their tomb. They would be pinned down, surrounded. No, the only option was to disappear, to use the storm and the wilderness as his weapon. He turned to the woman. "Can you walk?" She pushed herself up, her face tight with pain and determination. "I can run." "Good," Silas said, a flicker of respect in his eyes. He grabbed a backpack, stuffing it with a medical kit, rations, a water purifier, and ammunition. He slung it over his shoulder. He looked at Bear. "Watch her." The dog positioned himself between the woman and the door, a silent, furry sentinel. Silas moved to the back of the cabin, to a small, reinforced window that overlooked the steepest part of the mountain. It was a 20-foot drop to a rocky ledge below, an emergency exit he'd built for a situation exactly like this. He handed the woman a spare pistol. "Ever used one of these?" She took it, her hand surprisingly steady. "My father was a Marine. He taught me." "Good," Silas said again. He could hear them at the front door, preparing for a breach. He didn't have much time. "We go on my signal. Stay behind me. Do exactly as I say. No matter what, we don't stop." She nodded, her eyes wide but resolute. Outside, the sharp, metallic click of a breaching tool locking onto the doorframe echoed through the cabin. Silas gave her a final, steady look. "Ready?" She met his gaze. "Ready." The front door exploded inward, splintering into 1,000 pieces. Chaos erupted. Flashbangs detonated, flooding the room with blinding white light and a deafening roar. Through the ringing in his ears, Silas heard them shouting, "Clear! Clear! Go!" But they were entering an empty room. Silas had already moved. The second the breacher locked on, he had smashed the rear window. He helped the woman, he still didn't know her name, through the opening, and lowered her as far as he could before letting her drop to the ledge below. She landed with a pained grunt, but scrambled to her feet. Bear followed, a blur of fur leaping effortlessly into the darkness. Silas was last, dropping and rolling, his rifle held tight to his chest. Below them, the mountain fell away into a black, churning sea of forest. The storm was their shield. Gunfire erupted from the cabin above, suppressed rounds thudding into the trees around them. They weren't aiming. They were suppressing, trying to pin them down. "Move!" Silas yelled over the wind, grabbing the woman's good arm. They plunged into the wilderness, swallowed by the raging storm. The forest floor was a treacherous soup of mud, roots, and slick rocks. They ran, fueled by adrenaline, Silas in the lead, Bear flanking them, a silent shadow moving through the undergrowth. After 10 minutes of a lung-searing sprint, Silas found a small overhang, a shallow cave carved out of a rock face. It wasn't much, but it was temporary concealment. He pushed the woman inside, then took up a defensive position at the entrance, his rifle scanning the dark woods. The sounds of pursuit were faint, muffled by the gale. For now. He turned to the woman, who was slumped against the rock wall, breathing in ragged gasps. Her face was pale, but her eyes were alive, burning with a fierce light. "My name is Aris," she said, her voice stronger now. "Dr. Aris Thorne." "Silas." "Thank you," she said, looking from him to Bear, who had curled up protectively at her feet. "You and your partner." "He's good to have around," Silas replied, his attention still on the forest. "You need to tell me what's going on. Who are they? What is this drive you mentioned?" Aris took a deep breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. "I was a lead researcher at Etheria Corp. The CEO, Julian Croft, he's a public darling, a philanthropist. He launched something called the Sanctuary Project. Publicly, it's a revolutionary neuro-regenerative agent, a cure for Alzheimer's, dementia, a miracle." She paused, her expression hardening. "But it's a lie. The core of the agent, it can be weaponized. It's not a cure. It's a programmable neurotoxin. It can target specific genetic markers, induce anything from a seizure to a catastrophic aneurysm. Undetectable, untraceable. The perfect assassination tool." Silas absorbed the information, his face an unreadable mask. Politics, corporate espionage. It was a world away from his, yet the violence was the same. And Croft? He's been selling it to rogue states, corporate rivals, anyone with enough money. I found the real data, the transaction logs. I copied everything onto a single encrypted, hardened drive. She looked at him, her gaze pleading. The silver drive. It was in my pocket. It must have fallen out back at the ravine. Silas's mind flashed back to the small object in the mud. He cursed internally. It was the key to everything. They don't have it, he said, more to himself than to her. If they did, they'd be gone. That meant they were still hunting, and it meant he had to go back. He was no longer just a protector. He was now part of her mission. He had to retrieve that legacy of truth. He looked at Aris, then at the sleeping form of Bear. His sanctuary had been violated, his peace shattered. But in its place, a cold, familiar purpose was beginning to form. This was a new kind of war, but the rules were the same. Survive, adapt, overcome, and protect the innocent at all costs. The hunt was on, but now it was a two-way street. The rain had softened to a persistent, chilling drizzle by the time dawn broke, filtering a weak grey light through the dense canopy of firs and cedars. The world was washed out, colourless. They had been moving for hours, a slow, grueling trek deeper into the untamed wilderness. Aris was flagging, the initial burst of adrenaline long gone, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion and throbbing pain from her broken arm. Silas had fashioned a crude but effective splint from a branch and strips of his own t-shirt, his movements sure and practiced. He was a paradox of lethality and care, a man who could neutralize a threat from 500 meters but could also gently set a broken bone. They were being stalked. Silas didn't need to see them to know. He could feel it in the unnatural silence of the woods, in the way the air prickled on the back of his neck. Bear felt it too, his head constantly swiveling, his ears twitching, sampling the wind for any foreign scent or sound. The mercenaries were good. They were fanning out, using a grid search pattern, patient and professional. They had technology on their side, thermal images that could cut through the fog and foliage. But Silas had the land. He had grown up in mountains like these. He knew how the water flowed, how the rocks held the cold, how the wind carried sound. He was an apex predator in his natural habitat. He found a game trail and led them along it for a half-mile before abruptly cutting away, leading them through a shallow, fast-moving creek for another 100 yards. The cold water would mask their scent and wash away their tracks. It was a brutal, shocking cold that made Aris gasp, but she bit her lip and pushed on, her trust in him absolute. He was her guardian, her only hope. "They'll have a leader," Silas said quietly, as they paused to rest behind a massive fallen redwood, its roots creating a natural wall. "Someone in charge. He'll be the smartest, the most patient. He's the one I'm worried about." He pulled a high-protein ration bar from his pack and handed it to her. She took it, her fingers clumsy with cold. "How do you know so much?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's what I do," he replied simply. There was no ego in the statement. It was a fact, like saying the sky was blue. He was an operator. This was his trade. Suddenly, Bear went rigid, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He was staring intently at a spot 20 yards ahead, where the forest floor was thick with ferns. Silas followed his gaze. He saw nothing, but he trusted the dog. He put a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. He unslung his rifle, the movement utterly silent. He scanned the area through his scope, and then he saw it. A faint, almost invisible filament of wire stretched ankle-high between two trees. A tripwire, linked to a pressure plate or a motion sensor. It wasn't explosive. It was an early warning system. Amateurs used explosives. Professionals used alarms. They wanted to corner their prey, not obliterate it. Silas felt a grim smile touch his lips. They were smart, but not smart enough. He motioned for Aris to stay put. He circled wide around the tripwire, moving with a ghostly quietness that defied his size. Bear shadowed him, his paws making no sound on the damp earth. Silas found the source, a small camouflaged sensor staked into the ground, wired to a satellite uplink. They were creating a digital fence, trying to funnel them into a pre-planned kill zone. He didn't disable it. Instead, he pulled a small roll of duct tape from his pack, an operator's panacea, and carefully taped a large fern frond to the wire. The constant, gentle motion of the frond in the breeze would trigger the sensor intermittently, creating a series of false positives. It would sow confusion. It would make them doubt their technology. It was a small act of psychological warfare. He returned to Aris, his expression unchanged. "We need to move," he said, "and we need to get back to the ravine." She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. "Go back? But they're there." "They're everywhere," Silas corrected her. "But they think we're running away. They don't expect us to double back, and we need that drive. Without it, none of this matters. Your sacrifice, this fight, it's all for nothing." He saw the conflict in her eyes, the instinct to flee, warring with the conviction of her purpose. "You said you found a legacy of truth," he said, his voice low and intense. "Legacies are worth fighting for. They're worth dying for." The fear in her eyes was replaced by a steely resolve. She got to her feet, her jaw set. "Okay," she said. "What's the plan?" The plan was audacious. It was reckless. It was exactly the kind of move they would never anticipate. They wouldn't just go back for the drive. They would use the enemy's own tactics against them. They would turn the hunters into the hunted. Silas needed a way to communicate, a way to break out of the bubble of isolation the mercenaries had created. His own satellite phone had been left at the cabin, useless. But operators always have contingencies. Sewn into the lining of his pack was a small waterproof pouch. Inside was a burner phone and a compact, high-gain antenna. It was a last resort, a ghost line to a world he had tried to leave behind. While Aris rested, her injured arm propped on a moss-covered log, Silas assembled the antenna, his fingers moving with practiced dexterity. He needed elevation and a clear line of sight to the southern sky. He found it on a rocky outcropping that offered a panoramic and dangerously exposed view of the valley. He lay flat on the cold stone, shielding the phone's screen with his body. Bear lay beside him, a low, watchful presence. He dialed a number he knew by heart, a number that didn't officially exist. It rang twice. A clipped, gravelly voice answered. No greeting, just, "Go." "It's Vanguard," Silas said, using his old call sign. There was a pause on the other end. "Vanguard is on leave, hiking." The voice was laced with suspicion. It was Marcus, a former ranger, now a federal agent in a unit so classified it was buried under 3 layers of bureaucratic denial. He was the only one Silas trusted implicitly. "Leave is compromised," Silas said. "I'm in the Cascades, north of Diablo Lake. I've picked up a package, non-combatant. She's carrying sensitive corporate intel. Hostile pursuit by a high-level PSC team. 4, maybe 5 operators, well equipped." He gave Marcus the coordinates. "They're trying to box me in. I need an exit strategy, and I need to know who I'm up against. The client is Julian Croft, Etheria Corp. There was another pause, longer this time. Silas could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard. Croft, Marcus said, his voice tight. You've kicked a hornet's nest, Silas. Etheria's security contract is with Argent Tactical. Silas's blood ran cold. Argent Tactical. They were the best, or the worst, depending on your perspective. A private military company staffed exclusively by ex-Tier 1 operators. They were ghosts, deniable assets for corporations and governments who wanted problems to disappear quietly. And their leader was a man Silas knew, a man he had served with, a man he despised. Cade. Cade is running the team, Marcus confirmed, as if reading his mind. He's on site. He's the patient one you're worried about. Cade. Arrogant, ruthless, and brilliant. He saw the world as a chessboard and people as pawns. He was Silas's dark reflection, everything Silas could have become if he had let the war consume him completely. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was personal. I can't get a bird to you without lighting up the whole state, Marcus said. Croft has eyes everywhere, but I can create a window. There's a logging road 20 clicks east of your position, Route 7. I'll have a vehicle waiting for you, unmarked, keys under the floor mat. But you have to get there. I can give you a 24-hour window. After that, you're on your own. 20 clicks. Through this terrain, with an injured civilian, hunted by Argent Tactical. It was a lifetime away. One more thing, Silas said. The package, Dr. Thorne. She dropped the intel. Hardened drive. Back at my AO. I have to retrieve it. Negative, Vanguard, Marcus shot back. Mission is to extract the asset. The intel is secondary. The asset says the intel is the only thing that matters, Silas countered, his voice like flint. It's the whole reason she's a target. I'm going back for it. He could feel Marcus's frustration through the phone. Your call, but you're walking into the heart of their kill box. Cade will be expecting you to run. He won't expect you to come back. I know, Silas said. That's the only advantage I have. He ended the call, breaking down the antenna and stowing the gear. The game had changed. He knew the enemy's name. He had a destination. And he had a plan. He slid back down the rock face to where Aris was waiting. The fear was still in her eyes, but it was overshadowed by a fierce resolve. We have a ride, Silas told her. But first, we're going hunting. They moved through the twilight, not away from the danger, but towards it. Silas was no longer just reacting. He was dictating the terms of the engagement. He was turning Cade's chessboard into his own personal battlefield. The journey back to the ravine was a masterclass in stealth and deception. Silas moved like a wraith, using every shadow, every fold in the terrain to his advantage. Aris followed in his footsteps, her pain a constant, grinding presence. But her will was iron. She would not be the weak link. She would not fail this man who had become her unlikely protector. They reached the ridge overlooking the cabin just as the last light faded from the sky. The cabin itself was dark, a wounded silhouette against the bruised purple of the horizon, but the area was crawling with activity. Silas lay prone, using his rifle scope as a monocular. He counted 4 mercs. Cade was not among them. He was likely in a mobile command post, coordinating the hunt. 2 of the men were meticulously searching the area around the cabin. The other 2 were focused on the ravine. They were sweeping it with high-powered flashlights, their beams cutting sharp white cones through the darkness. They were looking for the drive. "They haven't found it," Aris whispered, her voice tight with tension. "Not yet," Silas confirmed. "They're being careful. They don't want to damage it." He watched them, his mind a cold calculator. He couldn't engage them directly. A firefight would bring the entire team down on them. He needed a diversion, a big one. He scanned the area around the cabin. His eyes settled on the two black SUVs parked near the tree line, and next to them the spare propane tanks for the cabin's generator. An idea, reckless and dangerous, began to form. A plan that would require perfect timing and a healthy dose of luck. He turned to Aris. "I'm going to draw them away. When they move, you have one chance. Get down to the ravine, find that drive, and get back here. No matter what you hear, you do not stop. You do not wait for me. You get the drive and you run east. Follow the creek. I'll find you." She stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief and terror. "How? What are you going to do?" "Create a problem they can't ignore," he said, his gaze fixed on the propane tanks. He gave her a small, powerful GPS tracker from his pack. "Keep this on you. I'll find you." He looked at Bear, who was watching him with an almost human understanding. "Go with her," he commanded. "Protect her." The dog whined, torn between his two duties, but he moved to Aris's side, pressing against her leg. A silent promise. Silas took a deep breath. This was the pivot point, the moment where the mission would either succeed or fail catastrophically. He gave Aris a final, hard look. Go. The city was a different kind of jungle, one of concrete, steel, and glass. The Seattle mist was a constant companion, a damp grey breath that clung to the city and gave the air a sharp, clean smell. It was a world away from the primal green of the mountains, but for Silas and Aris, it was no less dangerous. After a harrowing 24-hour trek, they had reached Marcus's designated pickup, a beat-up Ford Bronco that smelled of stale coffee and motor oil. The drive out of the mountains had been silent and tense, the explosion of the propane tanks a fading echo in their minds. Silas had executed his plan with chilling precision, using a single, well-placed shot from 300 yards to rupture one of the tanks. The resulting fireball had turned night into day and sent Cade's team scrambling. It was the window Aris needed. She had found the small silver drive half buried in the mud, its metallic shell cold to the touch. It felt impossibly heavy, a tiny object containing a world of secrets and death. Now they were holed up in a cheap motel near the shipyard, the rhythmic groan of foghorns a constant reminder of their urban isolation. The room was small and anonymous, a perfect place to disappear. Aris sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, the drive clutched in her hand. She had cleaned up, her face scrubbed, her hair pulled back. The gash on her forehead was stark against her pale skin. She looked less like a victim and more like a soldier, a warrior. Silas stood by the window, peering through a gap in the grimy curtains at the rain-slicked street below. He had traded his tactical gear for jeans and a dark hoodie, but he still moved with the same coiled energy. The city was a new kind of kill box, one with 1,000,000 eyes. CCTV, facial recognition, credit card tracking. Croft owned this city, and his digital web was everywhere. "He knows we're here," Aris said, her voice flat. "Cade failed. Croft won't let that stand. He'll escalate." "I know," Silas said. "He'll lock down the city's exit points, airports, train stations, highways. He's putting us in a cage." Bear, who had been sleeping at the foot of the bed, raised his head, a low whine escaping his throat. He sensed their tension. Silas walked over and knelt beside the dog, scratching him behind the ears. The simple, physical contact was grounding. "You did good out there, boy," he murmured. It was the most emotionally open he had been since the ordeal began. Aris watched them, a small, sad smile on her face. "He never leaves your side." "We've been through a lot," Silas said, his gaze distant. "He's the only one who was there for all of it." He stood up, his focus returning to the mission. "We can't stay here, and we can't run. Our only move is to attack." Aris looked up at him, her eyes questioning. "Attack Julian Croft? He's one of the most powerful men in the country. His headquarters is a fortress." "Every fortress has a weakness," Silas said. He pulled a chair over and sat opposite her. "Tell me about Etheria Tower." For the next hour, Aris drew a detailed layout of the corporate headquarters from memory. Security checkpoints, elevator systems, server room locations, Croft's penthouse office. She was meticulous, her scientist's mind for detail proving to be as valuable as Silas's tactical knowledge. As she spoke, a plan began to form in Silas's mind. It was audacious, bordering on suicidal. They wouldn't try to leak the data from the outside. They would go into the heart of the beast and upload it directly to every major news network and federal agency from Croft's own server. They would use his system against him. "There's a gala," Aris said. "Tonight. A big fundraiser for the Sanctuary Project. The whole top floor will be full of the city's elite. Security will be focused on the guests, on the public-facing areas." "A perfect diversion," Silas finished for her. The juxtaposition was stark. The opulence of the gala versus the grim reality of their mission. Tuxedos and tactical gear. Champagne and cordite. It was a world of smoke and mirrors, and they were about to set it on fire. Getting in would be the hardest part. They had no invitations, no credentials. But Silas had Marcus. He made another call on the burner phone. "I need a way into Etheria Tower. Tonight." "You're insane," Marcus said, but there was a hint of admiration in his voice. "Cade is hunting you with everything he's got. Croft has the SPD on a private retainer. You walk in there. You're not walking out." "Just get me in the door," Silas said. "I'll handle the rest." There was a long silence. "There's a maintenance crew. HVAC specialists. They're scheduled for routine service on the upper floors at 2100 hours. I can get you 2 uniforms and ID badges, but the IDs won't stand up to close scrutiny, and they'll have a dog with them, a bomb-sniffing dog." Silas looked at Bear. A grim smile touched his lips. "That won't be a problem." Etheria Tower was a gleaming spear of glass and steel that pierced the Seattle sky. It was a monument to wealth and power, a modern-day fortress. Inside, on the 60th floor, the Sanctuary Project Gala was in full swing. Men in tailored tuxedos and women in designer gowns mingled, sipping champagne and listening to the smooth jazz of a live quartet. Julian Croft moved among them, a charismatic, predatory shark in his own aquarium. He was handsome, articulate, and radiated an aura of success that people found intoxicating. He was also a sociopath and a murderer. 2 floors below, Silas and Aris stepped out of a service elevator, dressed in grey maintenance jumpsuits. Bear walked calmly between them, a service dog vest fitted over his powerful chest. He looked the part perfectly. Silas carried a heavy toolkit. Aris carried a clipboard. To any casual observer, they were invisible, part of the building's unseen machinery. But under his jumpsuit, Silas wore a low-profile plate carrier and carried his pistol 3 spare magazines, and a combat knife. The toolkit contained not wrenches and screwdrivers, but breaching charges, signal jammers, and a high-speed data transfer device. Aris's clipboard held not maintenance schedules, but floor plans and security codes. They moved through the sterile white corridors of the 58th floor, their footsteps echoing in the silence. This was the nerve center of Etheria Corp, a maze of offices and data hubs. It was deserted, the staff either at the party above or gone for the night. They reached the primary server room. The door was protected by a keypad and a biometric scanner. "This is as far as the maintenance keycard gets us," Aris whispered. "The rest is up to you." Silas set down the toolkit. He placed a small electronic device over the keypad. It cycled through code combinations at a dizzying speed. After 30 seconds, there was a soft click. The keypad light turned green. That was the easy part. The biometric scanner was tied to a handful of top-level executives, including Croft. Bypassing it was impossible, so Silas didn't try. He opened his toolkit and removed a small shaped charge, no bigger than a deck of cards. He placed it carefully over the lock mechanism. "Get back," he ordered. He moved down the hall, with Aris and Bear close behind. He pressed a button on a small detonator. There was a sharp, muffled crack, like a champagne cork popping. It was just loud enough to be effective, but hopefully not loud enough to alert the guards 2 floors up. When they returned, a neat, circular hole had been punched through the door right where the lock had been. The server room was cold and dark, filled with humming black monoliths, the digital heart of Croft's empire. "Here," Aris said, moving to a specific terminal. "This is the master control hub. If I can get in here, I can access everything." She pulled the silver drive from her pocket and inserted it. Lines of code began to scroll across the screen. "I need 5 minutes," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard, "to break the encryption and initiate the broadcast." Silas didn't reply. He was already moving, his attention on the hallway outside. He was the guardian at the gate. He knew they wouldn't have 5 minutes. The silent alarm from the breached door would already be pinging on a security console somewhere. He didn't have to wait long. The chime of the service elevator announced the arrival of visitors. The doors slid open, and 2 Argent tactical operators stepped out, rifles at the ready. They saw the hole in the server room door and immediately raised their weapons. Silas was faster. He fired 2 shots from his suppressed pistol. 2 quiet coughs. Both men dropped without making a sound. He didn't celebrate. He knew this was just the opening salvo. Cade would be on his way. He would bring the whole team. A voice, cold and familiar, crackled from the radio on one of the dead mercs' vests. "Bravo, team. Report. What's your status?" Silas knelt and picked up the radio. He pressed the transmit button. "Bravo team has been neutralized," he said, his voice low and steady. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then, Cade's voice, dripping with venomous fury. "Silas, I should have known. You always did have a flair for the dramatic." "I'm ending this, Cade," Silas said. "It's over." "It's not over until I put you in the ground," Cade snarled. "I'm on my way up. Nowhere to run this time." The line went dead. Silas looked back at Aris. "How much longer?" "1 minute," she said, her face illuminated by the green glow of the screen, sweat beading on her forehead. The elevator chimed again. This time, when the doors opened, Cade stepped out. He wasn't alone. 4 more operators fanned out behind him, creating an unbreakable wall of firepower. Cade himself was dressed in black tactical gear, his rifle held loosely in one hand. He had an arrogant smirk on his face. "Nowhere to run, Silas," he repeated, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. He saw the two bodies of his men on the floor, and his smirk vanished, replaced by a cold rage. "You'll pay for that." Silas didn't answer. He raised his pistol. Cade and his men raised their rifles. It was a standoff, a kill box of his own making, but he wasn't alone. "Now!" Aris yelled from the server room. On the screen, a progress bar hit 100%. Upload complete. A dozen news networks, the FBI, the SEC, the DOD, they all had it now. The Sanctuary Project was exposed. Croft's legacy was in ashes. Cade's face contorted in fury. He opened his mouth to give the order to fire. But before he could, a black-furred missile shot out of the server room. Bear, silent and swift, launched himself through the air. He wasn't aiming for the armed men. He was aiming for the leader. He slammed into Cade's chest with the force of a battering ram, knocking him off his feet. The rifle flew from Cade's grasp. The other operators, momentarily stunned, hesitated, their training screaming at them not to fire wildly with their leader in the mix. It was the only opening Silas needed. He fired, not to kill, but to disable. He put one round in the shoulder of the man on the far left, another in the knee of the man on the right. The disciplined fire from his suppressed pistol was a stark contrast to the panic that was about to unfold. The operators, their formation broken, returned fire. The hallway erupted in a cacophony of unsuppressed gunfire. Bullets tore chunks out of the drywall, shattering the sterile silence. Silas grabbed Aris and pulled her back into the relative safety of the server room as rounds stitched the air where they had been standing. He pushed her behind a large server rack. "Stay down." Bear had Cade pinned, his teeth bared, a guttural snarl ripping from his throat. Cade, his face a mask of terror and rage, fumbled for the pistol on his hip. "Get it off me," he screamed. Silas saw the movement. He had a clear shot. He could end it. End Cade, the man who represented everything he hated. But he wasn't an assassin. He was a protector. He aimed carefully and fired once. The round struck Cade's hand, shattering the bone and sending the pistol skittering across the polished floor. Cade screamed in agony. The remaining two operators, seeing their leader incapacitated, broke. One began to lay down, suppressing fire toward the server room, while the other tried to pull Cade to safety. This was his chance. Silas grabbed two of the flashbangs from his toolkit. He pulled the pins, cooked them for 2 seconds, and threw them out into the hallway. The detonations were overwhelming in the enclosed space. White light and concussive sound. He burst out of the server room, moving through the disoriented mercenaries. He didn't fire. He used his hands, his body, the rifle as a blunt instrument, a strike to the throat, an elbow to the temple. It was brutal, efficient, and over in seconds. The hallway fell silent, the only sounds the ringing in his ears, Cade's pained whimpers, and the heavy panting of Bear, who still stood guard over his defeated foe. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The first wave of the fallout from Aris's data dump. Silas walked over to Cade, who was clutching his ruined hand. "It's over," Silas said again, his voice devoid of triumph. He looked down at the man who was once his brother in arms. He felt nothing but a cold, empty pity. He backed away, calling Bear to his side. He grabbed Aris's hand. "Let's go." They didn't take the elevator. They took the stairs. They descended through the heart of the tower, the sounds of chaos and celebration from the gala above fading, replaced by the approaching sirens of justice. They had walked into the fortress, faced the dragon, and emerged from the fire, not unscathed, but victorious. Their war was over. The aftermath was a quiet storm. They spent 2 days in a secure federal safe house provided by Marcus, the city outside buzzing with the scandal of Etheria Corpagi. Julian Croft had been arrested at his own gala, his face a perfect mask of indignant fury for the cameras. Cade and the surviving members of his Argent tactical team were in federal custody, their world of shadow operations dragged into the harsh light of day. The Sanctuary Project was exposed for the weapon it was. Its dark legacy stopped before it could truly begin. The safe house was a sterile, comfortable prison. Aris, her arm now in a proper cast, spent hours on the phone with federal investigators, methodically detailing every piece of data, every crime she had uncovered. She was no longer just a scientist. She was a witness, a crusader. Silas watched her, a quiet observer. He saw the exhaustion in her eyes, but also a new strength, a purpose that burned brighter than ever. Silas spent his time with Bear. He cleaned the dog's coat, checked his paws for cuts, and sat with him for long, silent hours. The bond between them needed no words. Bear had faced down Cade's team without hesitation, a living embodiment of courage and loyalty. He was more than a partner. He was family. On the 3rd day, Marcus came to see them. He looked tired but satisfied. "You two are the biggest story in the world right now," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "The media is calling Dr. Thorne a hero. They're calling you a ghost, a mystery guardian." Silas just shrugged. He didn't care about the labels. "What happens now?" he asked. "To Croft? To Argent?" "Croft's empire is crumbling. He'll be buried under so many charges, he'll never see the sun again," Marcus said. "Argent Tactical is being dismantled by a dozen different agencies. You cut the head off the snake, Silas. The whole organization is toxic." He turned to Aris. "You'll have to testify, but you'll have full federal protection. You're safe now." Aris nodded, a weight lifting from her shoulders. "And Silas?" Marcus looked at his friend. He saw the weariness in his eyes, the familiar burden of the warrior who has seen too much. "Officially, you were never there. Your leave is still on the books. You can go back to your cabin. Go back to your search for peace." Silas looked out the window at the grey Seattle sky, the cabin, his sanctuary. But the word felt different now. It was no longer just a place. He looked at Aris, then down at Bear, who was resting his head on Silas's knee. His sanctuary was right here. "I'm not going back to the cabin," Silas said quietly. Aris looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Where will you go?" He met her gaze. "I don't know yet. But I'm done running from the world. Maybe it's time I tried living in it." That evening, after Marcus had left, Silas and Aris sat in the quiet living room of the safe house. The television was off. The silence was comfortable, earned. "What you did," Aris began, her voice soft. "Back there, in the tower. You could have killed him. Cade." "It wasn't my mission," Silas said. "My mission was you." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. "All this time I thought I was protecting a secret," she said. "But I was just a messenger. You were the real protector, the guardian." He didn't deny it. The word felt right. It fit better than soldier or operator ever had. A guardian, a protector. It was a purpose that extended beyond the battlefield. It was a legacy he could build for himself. We were a good team, he said, a rare, small smile touching his lips. We were, she agreed. She reached out with her good hand and placed it on his. So, what does a ghost do when the war is over? He looked at her hand on his, then into her eyes. He saw not a victim or an asset, but a partner, a survivor, a warrior in her own right. He finds a new mission, Silas said. He finds something to protect, something to build. He knew then that his search for peace wasn't over, but it had changed. He wouldn't find it in solitude, but in connection. Not in the absence of conflict, but in the fight for something that mattered. He had walked into the wilderness a weapon without a target, and he had walked out a man with a purpose. 3 months later, the sun was warm on Silas's face, a stark contrast to the perpetual mist of the Pacific Northwest. He stood on the porch of a small, rustic ranch house nestled in a wide, golden valley in Montana. The sky was a vast, brilliant blue, the air clean and sharp. It was a place of profound peace, a sanctuary. Bear was chasing a grasshopper in the tall grass, his movements joyful and free. He was no longer a weapon on high alert, but simply a dog enjoying the sun. The front door opened and Aris came out, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. Her cast was gone, replaced by a thin scar on her forearm. She looked healthy, relaxed, happy. She handed him a glass. He seems to have adjusted to retirement, she said, nodding toward Bear. We all have, Silas replied, his gaze sweeping over the valley. After the trial, Aris had used the money from a whistleblower fund to buy this place, a refuge, a place to heal and start over. She had invited him to come with her. He hadn't hesitated. This was their new legacy, not one of secrets and data, but of peace and shared purpose. He was still a guardian, but his charge was no longer a person or an object. It was this feeling, this quiet, simple life they were building together. He had found his home not in a place, but with his pack. He felt Aris lean her head on his shoulder. Do you miss it? She asked softly. The action, the fight? Silas thought for a moment, watching Bear pounce on the unsuspecting grasshopper. He thought of the cold focus, the adrenaline, the clarity of the mission. He thought of Cade, of Croft, of the darkness he had waded through his entire adult life. He had been forged in that fire, and it would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. Sometimes, he admitted honestly, but I was a weapon for a long time. It feels good to finally be a shield. He put his arm around her, pulling close. Bear, his hunt successful, trotted back to the porch and lay down at their feet with a contented sigh. The 3 of them stood there, a strange and unlikely family, watching the sun begin to set over the mountains. A man, a woman, and a dog, a protector, a survivor, and the loyal heart that had brought them all together. Silas Cain had gone into the storm searching for peace and found a war. But in winning that war, in choosing to be a guardian, he had finally found his sanctuary. The greatest missions are not the ones we are assigned, but the ones we choose. The ones that redefine our purpose and show us who we are meant to be. This man and his dog were asked to be heroes, and they answered the call. If you believe in the power of loyalty and the courage of a righteous heart, comment Amen below. God bless you, and God bless the guardians among us.